Listening to works with ostinato passages, one is often captivated by the immediate and persistent motivic repetition. While this repetition might initially suggest stasis, multiple concurrent ostinato layers of varying lengths can create a dynamic experience, conveying a sense of process. This video explores the technical aspects of these superimposed ostinati, demonstrating how Igor Stravinsky and Tigran Hamasyan, despite their distinct styles, use them as compositional tools to shape metrical identity and formal structure in their works. Let's begin by listening to an excerpt from the end of the third movement of Stravinsky's Symphony of Psalms. Focus on the repeating figures in the score. The yellow figure represents a four-note ostinato primarily articulated by the timpani, while the blue figure indicates a three-note ostinato that begins simultaneously in the soprano part. After listening, you might notice that the 12-measure phrase is characterized by the interaction between the two ostinato layers. You may wonder whether the repetitions begin and end arbitrarily, and how formal divisions are established by these superimposed ostinati. To address these questions, Gretchen Horlicher introduces the concept of a cycle to measure progress between two or more repeating strata. While each ostinato is indicated by repetitions within a single stratum, a cycle represents a higher level of repetition, defined by two or more superimposed ostinati transitioning from out of phase to phase alignment. Consider a hypothetical cycle where the two ostinati repeat exactly. This cycle, marked by brackets, features a two-voice structure that aligns every 12 half notes. Viewing the repetitions as a cycle helps illustrate the formal process between the strata and clarifies why certain changes happen at specific points. Notably, in the actual passage, the soprano ostinato is interrupted just as it would begin a second cycle. A D-flat 5 substitutes the expected D5, displacing the anticipated E-flat octave. This interruption prevents closure and maintains phrasal continuity. In short, the continuation of the soprano ostinato depends on the continuation of the ostinato below it. From a contrapuntal perspective, the cycle also highlights a developmental quality established between the two repeating strata. Despite the limited motion of each ostinato, Stravinsky's alignment allows for considerable intervallic variety. Furthermore, the change in the soprano ostinato in the fourth measure prevents an exact repetition within the phrase. The connected brackets above the staves indicate repeated successions of diatonic intervals, but the qualities of these intervals differ, as shown by the corresponding semitone measurements. This alteration not only ensures intervallic variety but also fosters a larger phrasal formation. When the soprano extends the phrase for two additional measures, the timpani ostinato completes only half of a second four-bar cycle. Consequently, when the six-measure soprano melody reiterates at rehearsal number 23, its alignment with the timpani ostinato changes. Thus, this latter 6-bar phrase is not an exact repetition of the previous one. Rather, it is a continuation, suggesting an antecedent-consequent phrase-like pair. At the end of this second phrase, the two ostinato layers finally align again, marking a significant formal boundary and a change in texture for the following passage. Having explored how the concept of a cycle enhances our understanding of Stravinsky's use of superimposed ostinati, we can now turn to Tigran Hamasyan, an Armenian jazz pianist and composer. Scott Schumann notes that ostinati, cycles, and asymmetrical meters are vital to Hamasyan's compositional style. While pitch changes highlight the boundaries of a Stravinsky cycle, Hamasyan's approach emphasizes the formal implications of alignment and misalignment between ostinati. In particular, Schumann distinguishes between complete cycles, where ostinati return to a shared alignment without disruption, and incomplete cycles, where the meter is disrupted before realignment. To illustrate how complete and incomplete cycles foster formal processes, let's examine Hamasyan's Etude No. 1, which begins with a 4-bar ostinato in 5/8 that recurs throughout the piece, sounding like this. The overall formal structure of the etude demonstrates how different cycles contribute to an accumulating trajectory. After introducing the 5/8 ostinato, the second stage presents an incomplete cycle with a new 7/8 repeating pattern. An additional ostinato layer intensifies the next stage, while the cycle remains incomplete. Ultimately, the etude resolves in the fourth stage, which features a complete 2-layered cycle before returning to the original single-layered ostinato. Let's look at the details. Schumann's analysis of the second stage of the etude also highlights the intervallic variety produced by the 5/8 and the 7/8 patterns. The downbeats of each layer realign for the first time after 28 measures, marked by the asterisk and red arrow. However, this sense of re-beginning is diminished by a melodic voice in the left hand, a 16-bar bass melody that first appears in the 9th measure and immediately repeats. This places the realignment moment in the middle of the 8-bar hypermeter. The cycle is ultimately disrupted when the 7/8 layer is cut short, leaving the 5/8 ostinato alone during the transition. Let's listen to this passage. In the next stage, the 5/8 ostinato and its bass melody return, while the 7/8 layer is extended to double the previous section's length. Additionally, a new ostinato layer articulates a steady pulsed C5 every 3/8 notes, enhancing the intensity of the 16-measure phrase. This cycle remains incomplete at the section's end, as the second and third layers are disrupted to accommodate the 5/8 ostinato. Following this disruption, a 2-layered counterpoint emerges, defined by the 5/8 pattern and the newly established 3/8 ostinato, now featuring elaborated gestures rather than a simple repeating note. Notably, both layers finally resolve at a shared point of alignment, suggesting formal closure, with only the 5/8 layer remaining conflict-free until the end. Let's listen to these two stages and observe how the cycle intensifies and ultimately resolves. Hamasyan's Etude Number 1 illustrates a formal process by manipulating the number of superimposed ostinati and the completeness of the corresponding cycles. Schumann identifies another distinctive approach in Hamasyan's works, termed the developmental cycle, which leverages the durational potential of the original ostinato introduced at the beginning. After establishing the initial cycle, one or more ostinato layers exhibit rhythmic diminution in later cycles, suggesting an intensifying developmental process. A clear example of this occurs in Hamasyan's two-part work, The Grid, Out of the Grid. The piece begins with a 6-note ostinato featuring an inter-onset interval series of 5, 5, 7, 5, 5, 5, 16th notes. This pattern intensifies in the second part, with each event in the ostinato is shortened by 1 or 2 16th notes. Notably, not only does the original ostinato transform, but so do its associated cycles. The first altered ostinato is superimposed with a constant 5/16 layer, while the second is paired with a constant 4/16 layer. Ultimately, the ostinato returns to its original durational pattern, marking the end of the process. Let's now listen to the opening of the piece and attune ourselves to this ostinato grid. Now, let's delve into the details of the cycles in the second part. The piano's right hand plays the transformed ostinato, presenting an IOI series of 4, 4, 5, 4, 4, 4, 16th notes. Simultaneously, a constant 5/16 layer with the same melodic profile begins in the left hand. Each onset of the shortened ostinato forms a different interval with the left hand pattern, except for the octave marked by the fourth iteration, which signals the midpoint of the cycle. This section highlights a complete cycle, where both layers return to their shared alignment point without disruption, leading into an interlude before the next cycle begins. The shortened ostinato carries over into the next cycle, but this time, there isn't an additional melodic layer in constant 5/16. Instead, the drums establish a regular backbeat pattern, with each attack spaced 4 16th notes apart, enhancing the durational intensification. Like the previous cycle, this passage seems to build toward a complete cycle. However, as suggested by the piece's title, the two ostinati eventually go out of grid. In the second half of the eighth melodic statement in the piano's layer, Hamasyan disrupts the cycle by increasing the tempo and returning to the original rhythmic content. This leads to the return of the original ostinato, marking the piece's conclusion. Let's listen to these two excerpts and observe how the developmental cycles shape the formal process. You are now equipped to describe the processes involved in superimposed ostinati through the concept of a cycle. This model includes various aspects, such as the intervallic variety created by the counterpoint of the ostinati, the phrasal boundaries marked by the completion of the cycle, and the formal processes indicated by the quantities and developmental qualities of the cycles. I encourage you to explore articles by Horliker and Schumann for more examples of concurrent ostinati in the music of Stravinsky and Hamasyan. Thank you for watching and enjoy your exploration.